You ready for this? Should be a good one. Okay, thank you for joining today's second episode of Around D3, where I just take a look at the game, what's been happening, any observations I might have. It's stuff that sort of popped into my head as I've been watching games and tracking soccer across this country in Division 3. I am Simple Coach, if you didn't know that by now, and that's the boss right there, Jackie. You want to say hello? No? Okay. So, I just wanted to offer some observations, as I did the last time, that things that sort of are popping out at me, some interesting things. I try to kind of look under, or at least take a little different perspective than sort of on the standards, and then I'm going to run through my top 25 women's teams and my top 25 men's teams. So hope you enjoy, and let's roll. Okay, so let's just start with some observations that I had and started, looking under the covers of how things are going. So I do have to say, to start, is this Stevens Institute of Technology men's team a real contender? And I'm thinking they are, because they look darn good. On Tuesday, they beat a pretty decent NYU team away at Gaelic Park in New York City, beating them 2-1. And then they traveled south to face a good College of New Jersey team and beat them 2-1, and are currently undefeated at 6-0-1. So I'm starting to think like they have some legs to them. On the flip side, on the women's side, you're looking at Misericordia, and who continues to rack up the wins, and they are sitting 6-0 for the season so far. I will say the game I'll be watching will be next Saturday on the 24th, and they're going to face another good team that stands at 5-0-1 in Messiah. So I think that's going to be a cracker of a game to follow, and I think really will either solidify Misericordia's position, or it'll sort of further elevate Messiah. So in case some of you had been tracking my progress on my deck, well, to let you know, it's still not done yet, and I continue to work on it. I took a look at Wednesday, September 14th. There were, I'll start with the women. There were 122 games. 16 of those ended in ties. So 13% of games ended up in ties. So if you looked at it, an 18-game season, you'd have 2 ties per team. For the men, there were 118 games. Of those, 22 of those games ended up in ties, and that's sort of about 18.5% of games were ties. So if I were to, again, extrapolate a little bit, for an 18-game season, every team would have three ties. So, I was thinking about it. I'm like, for one day's worth of games, 18 and a half seems high. Like I had been thinking, well, there's a lot of ties. Seems like there's a lot of ties. But, what do I know? So I decided to make a comparison, and I took a look at 2021. In 2021, the men had an average percentage of 8.3% across all games that ended in ties. And the women were slightly lower at 7.8% of all games ended in ties. Again, this is all of 2021. And I understand that I'm comparing an entire year of games. I don't even know how many games that would be. I'm assuming thousands, 3,000 guesstimate. I'm comparing an entire year to one day. But if it is reflective of where we're at by the end of the season, and if all things stay the same, the women will almost double the number of ties they had, and the men will have 2.5 times the number of ties this year, which is pretty significant. And I think a number of coaches I talked to really thought that where it's really going to matter is in their leagues and for the league tournaments. And yeah, so I'm going to keep tracking that just because I do find it interesting in sort of how things will be resolved, right? And I keep looking for, the most ties a team has had. And I think on the women's side, the most I saw was 3 ties for a team. And on the men's side, I think it was 4. So it's clearly going to have an impact. Okay, so this past Saturday, I think it was the 17th, Tufts, the big game of the day for Saturday was Tufts visited Amherst. The Tufts ended up winning in a game. They beat Amherst 3-2. I'm going to be honest. I didn't expect a soccer game, and I wasn't disappointed in that expectation. And I know this is going to be considered hurtful, and I know it's probably considered absurd in some quarters because of how successful they are, but I think Amherst is the place where soccer goes to die. And now on to the Calvin's women's team, who have not conceded a goal. They've scored 17 goals and are standing undefeated at 6-0, and so they're top 10 material, which is remarkable. And then I'm just going to say this too, which is really hard to watch because I sort of had some predictions early on. If you remember when I did my preseason review, what's going on with the boys of Ohio Wesleyan? If you told me that they would be winless in the first 6 games of the season, I would have definitely thought you'd been eating some of those special gummy bears. I'm sure this is not the way Jay Martin wanted this season to start. But on the flip side to that, you can't count them out. And so I would fully expect them to at some point turn it around and go into the NCAC and start winning their games there. And they have the capacity to win the conference, right? So even though they're going to have to deal with a really good Kenyon team, and they're going to have to deal with a rising Denison team that's showing that they're a force to beat. The College of New Jersey women's team is quietly dispensing with their opponents after losing their first game. They scored 30 goals and have conceded 10, 4 of which came in basically what I would call a good old-fashioned soccer brawl with NYU that ended in a 4-4 tie. So, despite new coach and TC&J is sort of moving through their schedule with a little bit of a quiet determination. So I'll be keeping an eye on them. Again, just statistics. 13 women's teams have 0 losses and 0 ties. I think that's down from 20 the first episode of around D3. And then on the men's teams, definitely down from last week. We have 16 unbeaten and untied men's teams. And one of those just so happens, because I watched it yesterday, Pacific Lutheran lost to Willamette 2-1 at Willamette, and they were undefeated at that point. So, yeah, I'll keep tracking those too. And then finally, look, I'm gonna just be honest. There's so many teams; it's hard to track who's good and watch them. But you just sort of notice. Like, I have no idea if University of Wisconsin Eau Claire is any good. Like, I haven't had a chance to watch them in action. I'll probably do so this week just because of what I'm seeing. But they're 9-0 right now. 9-0. And they've scored 28 goals and only conceded 5. You know, like I said, I don't know if they're any good. And I think probably next Sunday's match against Loras will be very interesting just because it's their first top 50 opponent. And I think it's kind of critical. And if they want to sort of make a splash, they're going to have to dispense with Loras, who have their own desires for a win. So, okay. So those are some of the things I've been watching, sort of tuned into. Now on to let's start with the women's top 25. Okay, so before I jump into the top 25 women's teams in the country, just to give you a sense as to how my very robust polling committee selects these teams. Pretty much it's what I like to see and what, how I think teams are performing, how teams look, but I try to give a nod to success and how they're doing. And, again, some of these folks might drop out, especially towards the end of the season when it becomes clear who is the cream versus other teams that might be having successful seasons, but in comparison, they just, their schedule or what have you. So, okay, so let's jump into the women's top 25, and let's do this. Okay, so let's roll with this. Okay, so start off, Trinity, Texas, who was not rated last week, making their first appearance. They on the strength of their 5-0-1 record. Next up, we have Swarthmore. They're down 5 from last week's poll because of their loss to the reigning champs, Christopher Newport. So, University of Rochester down 7 as a result of 2 ties this past week against St. John Fisher and a very good Hobart Smith team who, you'll see here shortly. I'm liking Wartburg. I tell you, I think they're a talented crew, so they climb the table. They are still undefeated at 7-0. RIT, giving them, dropping them a spot. They have a very tough game against Hobart Smith on Wednesday, tomorrow. So that'll be interesting to watch, see how they hold up. New entrant, as I mentioned earlier, after a tight loss to Messiah and a tie with Rochester, I think they have the medal. And like I said, they play RIT is their next game, so that'll be interesting to watch. Franklin and Marshall ties with Washington and Lee, and then Washington College, just by the competitive nature of the top 25. They dropped 9. Virginia Wesleyan didn't play any games, so I just sort of kept them there. They continue undefeated at 6-0. I'll tell you another program I like, Mary Hardin Baylor. They are up 5 spots, and they are undefeated at 6-0. MIT up 1. They've won 3 games since their loss to Claremont Mud Scripts a week and a half ago. So, new to the rankings, I'm gonna give it to a nod to Middlebury. Their only loss comes to Amherst, but they've been pretty solid otherwise. Chicago is down 3 spots at number 14. They had an away loss to a very good Calvin team, but I think that loss was pretty solid, so explains their drop. University of Wisconsin lacrosse, the frozen tundra during the winter. They dropped 7 following a loss that I don't think they should have had against Illinois Wesleyan. Pomona Pitzer down 3. They lost to reigning champs Christopher Newport 3-2, and then they tied Occidental. You know, another team I like, and it seems like the new staff has been getting them there. They're just racking up the wins and seem to be on track. They have a very difficult game. I believe it's today against Stevens Institute of Technology. So at Stevens. So that'll be one to watch this afternoon. Amherst down 3 after a loss to Tufts. Babson coming in at number 9. They're undefeated with two more wins. They make a huge jump. The interesting thing about Babson is I put them this high, but they have, because of what they've done in the last, they racked up 2 more wins. They have a really difficult stretch coming up where they're going to see Endicott, the Coast Guard. I think they're away. They're Bowdoin at home, and then they have MIT and Emerson on the road. So we'll see how they do. If they polish those off, all 5 of those off, they're legitimate contenders. So okay, let's see. Number 8, Pacific Lutheran up 4. They just keep rolling with wins. So team I'm really enjoying to watch, Calvin. They're up 6 after notching a pair of wins, including a fantastic game against Chicago where they won 2-0. And I thought it was a pretty solid performance. Okay, Tufts up 9. So I'm going out on a limb here. After 3 straight road games against Wesleyan, Amherst, and Williams, where they only lost a 1-0 game to Williams, I'm going to say that they have legs, and they deserve to be this high of a ranking. We'll see. That again, that's a tough stretch, so we'll see the rest of the NESCAC and how it goes. But yeah, so Tufts at number 6. So now the top 5. Let's go with Messiah up 3 to number 5. They're rolling along again. And they had a great victory against McDaniel, who I would suspect by the end of this season, they will be in the top 25. I think they're good. I just think they're finding their way right now. Number 4, Case Western Reserve up 1. They continue undefeated at 5-0. Johns Hopkins, number 3. I will say they have a big test on Saturday against Swarthmore. Number 2, Misericordia. I'm keeping them the same. They are undefeated at 6-0. And I'll tell you, if you're looking for a game, they play Messiah on Saturday. So, in this simple coach poll, number 2 squares off against number 5. So that'll be a cracker of a game. And I would expect some change to the top 25 by Saturday. And then finally, Christopher Newport. Undefeated. They keep rolling, doing their thing down there. Coach Gunderson just they've reloaded and they're just fine-tuned machine. They're undefeated. So and as reigning champs, that's where they stay until proven otherwise. Okay, so that's the top 25, and now on to the top 25 men's. All right, girl, you ready to roll, or are you going to take a nap? Yeah, I guess the nap. That wouldn't be a bad idea. All right. So let's roll on to the, I guess, week 2 of the men's top 25. And let us start with number 25, Milwaukee School of Engineering. The polling committee, the Simple Coach polling committee, spent many hours arguing, discussing this one, but ultimately it's because we can. Undefeated Milwaukee School of Engineering at number 25. St. Thomas, I'll say this is a placeholder a little bit. They haven't had any games. They don't play until Thursday, and they haven't played since the 3rd, and so we'll see. I dropped them just because of that. So if they keep their winning ways, they'll move up again. 23, Oneonta in the same spot. They're 4-0-1, but they look like a team that can play, so I'm keeping an eye on them. Bowdoin jumping onto the top 25, the Simple Coach top 25, 5-0 with an impressive win. It was against Connecticut. They are a team, like, and is defined. Like, I didn't see like individuals out there. I saw a collective unit defending and attacking as one. It was pretty impressive. So, and I think that's why Connecticut struggled against them. 21, down 4, Amherst. And look, all kidding aside, soccer doesn't go to die at Amherst. But there's something off, not only with Amherst, but I'll say Connecticut Tufts, that something doesn't look right. And maybe my expectations are a lot higher. And I think that might be a good thing, might be a bad thing. But I think their loss to Tufts was very... a little bit telling. Like, it showed some vulnerabilities that I don't think they had before. So just keep that in mind. Love Amherst. Number 20, Luther College down 7. Look, they had a tough loss against Chicago. They went ahead 1-0, and you could see like they were feeling it. But then Chicago, being Chicago, pulled off a really good win at Luther. So, at 20, Luther. Next up, Rochester, down 7. They had a loss to Hobart and Smith, and then they tied RIT, and so now they're 3-1-1. At 18, same as they were last week, Tufts. They had a big win against Amherst, and then I think what I would qualify as a disappointing tie against Williams, who I think looked a lot better than they have last year. The highlight for me, however, was seeing 2 players, Danny Yanez, who scored a cracker of a goal in that game, and then Cole Moriello, who midfielder for Williams, who I believe had an assist on one of the Williams goals, playing. I had the pleasure of coaching against them while they were at Pingree. So great to see those guys still out there and doing a fantastic job. Okay, number 17, down 2 spots is Connecticut. They're 2-1-1 with that loss to Bowdoin, but like I mentioned when I was talking about Amherst, something doesn't seem to be gelling in New London, and I don't know if it's again time of the season and sort of feeling things out, but something's amiss with some of these NESCAC teams that I wasn't expecting. So 16 at the same spot, Clarkson is 5-0. They are having a great run. And I think they could be 7-0 by the time they face what I think is probably their first real test, which is going up against Skidmore. So, okay, down a dramatic 13, Middlebury. And I think it's probably because maybe I was overgenerous putting them at number 2 last week, and now I'm compensating for it. But they did lose to Hamilton, which could have been a statement game for Middlebury, but instead it was a statement game for Hamilton, because Hamilton is doing very, very well. Up 10, no surprise, Washington and Lee. 4-1-1. Had a great game. I think they won 4-0 against Oglethorpe, and which, um, as history would have it, I was recruited by Oglethorpe. And then they tied Emory. There, it's another one where I'm just kind of like, they don't look the same as they did last year, and I don't expect, year over year that everybody's going to look the same, but there's some element there that just doesn't seem to be there. I don't know what that there is. Maybe I should have a conversation with Mike Singleton to get his impression. But yeah, anyhow. Okay, 13, SUNY Cortland up 8. They had a couple losses, at 4-2-1 to Rochester and Johns Hopkins, but they did have solid wins against Mary Washington away at Mary Washington, and then they beat a pretty decent, tough as nails New Jersey team in Rowan College. Loras down 7 to number 12. They lost to Gustavus Adolphus during the week, but then bounced back with a win on Saturday. I think I just sort of consistency of who they're playing and how they're playing. Hey, and another Jersey team that you can't deny right now. They are still unbeaten at 7-0. So Drew University at 11th. At 10th, who was not rated last week, Wesleyan, I think is the best of the NESCAC teams at 4-0 by the way they are playing. Not so much by their record or anything, but I think they seem to be the most complete team and with the most, enthusiasms than the others. And like I said, I can't. It's not something I can capture or know how to explain. So Wesleyan at 10. So Carnegie Mellon at up 1 spot to 9th. Look, I think there's some folks. I think there's some folks who not sure about Carnegie Mellon. I understand that, but in their 6 wins, they've only conceded 2 goals. And I do. That's something I do look at as how strong defensively is a team. And I would argue that these guys are pretty solid. And I do think there's something to be said about defense when you championships. So I'll be keeping my eye on, but I tend to think that they're pretty darn good. So another pretty darn good team out there, down a couple spots, but big wins against Hanover and Ohio Wesleyan, and they're out 5-0-1. This is where we're starting to get into the rarefied air that of teams that I think are really, I'm looking at really closely. So the first up is Stevens. They're up 4 spots. I am seriously liking how these guys play. 6-0-1. They had wins at TCNJ and NYU's Gaelic Park. Neither places are easy to play at. And they managed to come out with 2-1 victors in both games. So Stevens. Next up, the ghost of John Buford rides again at Gettysburg College, up 3 spots. This is another one, kind of in the same boat as Carnegie Mellon, but I thought, in spite of everything, I thought Gettysburg looked like a team that can play very well. Now, can they make it 90 minutes straight? I don't know, but right now I'm rewarding them because I think they're that good. Okay, so number 5, Kenyon. This is real. This is like Mount Everest rarefied air now. Kenyon, and I'll be honest with you, I'm sort of torn on this one because I haven't been overly impressed with how they have been playing. They seem to be shuffling around a lot. It doesn't seem to be flowing as easily as it did again last year. Again, maybe my expectations are skewed that way, but they're doing it and they're getting the results. So that's the part that only matters. But I will say a real big test, and another team that's sort of on my radar that I think has a lot of potential is Case Western Reserve, and they play Kenyon on Saturday. Another favorite of mine, up 4 spots, Johns Hopkins. They tied Emory, and then they won in a squeaker against Swarthmore. They won. Apparently, I didn't get to see the second half of the Swarthmore game, but apparently Swarthmore sort of took it to them. But that only tells me one thing. Like, defensively, they're in a spot where they haven't been. And I think, again, I look at that, and in their 5-0-2 record, they've only conceded 1 goal. And I think that's pretty impressive. Okay, the top threes are, who's going to argue? University of Chicago, just a fantastic team all around. They had a great win against a very good Luther team. And, in some moments they squeaked it out. In some other moments they imposed themselves. But you got a sense like they are in control of their own destiny. Number 2, North Park, up 1. They played 2 men down and still beat Knox College and still own the ball, which is pretty impressive, and I think speaks to their organizational abilities on the field. And I think that's tremendously important if you want to be anybody in Division III. And then finally, still my number 1 team, and probably because they're doing it consistently and they're doing it well and they're doing it in style, and they have been finding the goal, which I don't think necessarily was the case last year as easily, is Messiah. I think for the time being they are showing something that I'm not sure other teams have. So with that, that's the men's top 25. Okay, so thanks for joining me on this episode of Around D3 and walking through the men's and women's top 25s. I will say these are my personal, the Simple Coach Committee, polling committee top 25s. There are, just so happens this year, there's a bunch of polls out there. D3soccer.com, you should hop over there and take a look at the men's and women's top 25s. There's also, if you go to the message boards, there's also a fan poll, of which my poll is a part of, along with a bunch of other 10 crazies or so. So if you're into polling and you're into just sort of checking out, there's differences in all of them. Maybe one of these episodes I'll take a look just to see them and to compare and contrast. I don't know. If you have any comments or questions, you can leave them down below or shoot me an email on my dial-up, sc142949@aol.com. And yeah, I take a look at everything. So thanks again for joining, and look forward to seeing you all next week. Peace out.